In today's video, I'm going to show you how to mount your scope to your rifle using a simple process that's easily replicated at home or in the field. In my other videos, some of you may have seen this rifle, or at least me carrying it to do some demonstrations. And you may wonder, what the heck is that hillbilly doing? And honestly, what you've seen is my simple solution that I've used for quite a while on how to make this rifle fit my face and my eye and how to modify it best for my hunting. I'd like to do the same thing, show you guys how to do that today. I'd also like to explain why I do this. The reason I do something like this is, for one, to set an example and to show you that you can get equipment set up for your body very easily with little cost. And the biggest reason that I'm interested in you doing this at as little a cost as possible is that I don't want to introduce any other heartache on you and your family, or just you individually. If you're just getting into hunting, you may not enjoy this pastime. That's okay, and that's perfectly fine. But if you start to introduce financial stress to yourself and your family by making purchases larger than you probably should have, or spending money where it would be better used elsewhere, you're going to introduce stress. It's going to reduce your enjoyment or increase your obligation to feel that you have to get out and do certain things. And this is supposed to be a pastime. This is supposed to be relaxing. It's a good skill to know. For confidence. It's a good skill to know to basically, sort through the shit in your head and to give you some mental clarity and just to relax. If you introduce a stress of money, it's going to be hard to achieve those other objectives for hunting. Which should be intrinsic. It should be a desire for you to try to accomplish all those things I just mentioned. But the reason I'm showing this is, for one, practicality. I want you to understand the fundamentals of this, just like my other videos. I know some of them are winded, right? But I'm trying to get out a lot of good information to you so that you have confidence to make your decisions and live your life and hunt your hunt in the style that you're comfortable with. And most importantly, I want to be able to give you the knowledge how to set this rifle up if you should have to be somewhere, or you should happen to be somewhere where there's little resources. The way I show you requires few resources, gives you a bunch of knowledge, and is completely acceptable within the tolerances of hunting. And quite honestly, this technique worked for expert marksmen for quite a while. As we go into it, I'll give some other explanations, but let's just get into it, and we'll start by talking about some of the equipment and materials you need to have for this process. I got a little ahead of myself. First, we need to talk about why we're even doing this. So the major problem with a rifle that doesn't fit you well is that it slows you down. You're forced to move your body position around in order to see through the sights properly, taking precious time and losing precious time instead of getting on the game and killing it efficiently and effectively. By modifying this rifle, it's going to allow us to get on the game just a little quicker. And as still hunters, we've got about 3 to 5 seconds to get on the game and have accurate shots. So what we need to do is to mount this scope as low as possible to this barrel. Okay? There's a few things that inhibit us from getting as low to the barrel as possible. The first thing that bothers you or that gets in your way is the actual objective size. For the larger your objective lens, the higher off of the rifle barrel you get, the further your line of sight is from the barrel bore, the more introduction of variables for misalignment are introduced. So we want that rifle as close as possible so our bore and our scope are easy to see through and are most closely aligned. The first obstacle to that is the size of our bell housing. And I talked about it in the last video of why you pick the bell housing versus the power or magnification of that scope. That would be in video 9. All right, the second thing that's going to determine how close we can mount this scope to the barrel is our ring bases. Obviously, the higher the ring bases off of the barrel, the higher the scope will be off the barrel. And then not only the bases, but the size of our actual scope rings determine how high we'll get off of the barrel. So our objective is to mount it as low as possible. At that point, if our face doesn't line up, we are going to adjust our head position in the only place we have available, and that's at the butt of the rifle. Okay? Picatinny rails or pick rails also introduce some obstacles. Sometimes the length of that Picatinny rail interrupts the bell housing and doesn't allow us to mount it as low as possible. One of the great things about a pick rail is you have more variation front and back allowed with that mounting system. But it introduces one other problem if you have an internal magazine. You can see here that that pick rail can also interrupt you from loading the top of your magazine because that bar is continuous. All right, now we'll get into the materials. Obviously, you need the rifle you're going to carry. Set up how you would use it. You're also going to need your scope of choice. Again, go back to video 9, but in particular this is a 3x9x40 Leupold. You'll need a set of rings and bases or rings and a pick rail. You're going to need some thread locker. You can get the blue thread locker, which is removable, medium strength, or you can simply use nail polish. You'll need a set of Allen keys, either ones you have on hand or the ones that came with the scope. And you'll need a bar that's straight. For here I'm using my calipers. I've built up the butt of the rifle with 2 sets of material before. I've used duct tape and camp pad or puss pad. And here in this example I'm going to use Velcro, some sandpaper, and some foam shaped by that sandpaper. Both of these have worked well for me, so just pick whatever you got on hand and use them. If you want to dress up the modified area, you can use a cartridge holder like this or some other buttstock wrap. The next item are probably the most important items. You'll need some Q-tips and some degreaser, either denatured alcohol or acetone. Alright, before you begin work, it's probably the safest to remove the bolt. We're going to remove any of the parts that are in the way and start to degrease them. The reason we need to degrease them is so they don't loosen up after we've tightened them down. Grease and even thread locker will affect the torque of your screw. You'll see how I remedy that. I probably can't say it enough. Degreasing is very important. Now I'm going to be honest, I degreased these holes already before I started, but you'll see that I'm still getting grease out of them. I've had success with both thread locker and nail polish. Either one works. Now what I'm doing here is just setting the bases with one screw so they're held in place, and then I'm applying my thread locker and inserting that second screw. Now this next part is going to drive some people mad. A number 6 screw requires 15 pounds of torque. A number 8 screw requires 20 pounds of torque. The problem with that system is when you add thread locker, it acts as a lubricant and affects the torque that you apply to that screw. So instead of getting all wrapped around the axle, I just use the short end of that Allen key and turn it as hard as I can. And that's my torque. Now I'd never say never, but this has not failed me yet. Alright, now we're going to mount the bottom of our rings. Going to use the same system. I'm going to degrease the screws and the mounting surfaces, add my thread locker, and put them in place. Now there is one key thing to do in this step, and I'll show you in a second. Now here's the next key concept. When you're putting that base in, you've got to shove it forward and tighten it down so that the rings don't move during recoil. And you got to do that whether you're using weaver bases or a pick rail. Again, we put that ring base in, shove it forward, and secure it. You can see in any of these shots where I'm doing the final tightening, I'm just grabbing the small end of that Allen key and turning as hard as I can. Alright, of course I can't get a scope in here with these ring tops in, so I've got to undo all these screws and take off these ring tops. In order to help with the alignment of our eye in this modification, we need to take our scope and make sure that it's on the lowest power setting possible. And then we're just going to place the scope right in the ring. Now what I do is check to make sure I have some good forward and backward movement so that I can get my eye relief properly set later on. If your components didn't allow enough movement at this point, you might need to rearrange them or get new components. Of course, we're going to degrease all the parts. We'll set the scope back in the rings, place the tops on, and lightly secure those tops with the screws provided. It is important that you keep the space between the top and bottom of those rings equal for the left and right hand side of each ring. As you do this, you need to think about the most likely shooting position you'll be in when hunting. If you're still hunting or you're hunting timber, you'll probably be standing or kneeling. If you're hunting the west, you're most likely going to be kneeling or sitting. Good form in those shooting positions is beyond the scope of this video. I'll cover it later, but you do need to get in those shooting positions to check this rifle for fit to your body. You can see from the previous video, I expect to be shooting most of the time standing. You also probably noticed I need to raise my eye in order to see through the scope. I'm going to do that by raising the butt of the rifle. If I can get away with it, I don't want to have to remove this modification. So I'm marking the most rearward travel of the bolt and its removal on the stock of the rifle itself. I'm just cleaning up the butt of the stock so I can add some Velcro, and then I also got to remark that position. My foam was thick, so I cut it in half so I would have to remove less material. I just roughly measure the amount of sandpaper I need to form that foam block when I'm building this up. In order that the foam get formed somewhat like the Velcro, I added the Velcro and then the sandpaper. Yeah, you can see there I didn't start out that way, but I made the adjustment. And this is just me, sand and foam. It's exciting. Again, I degreased everything. I'm going to stick Velcro on this, and so there was a bunch of debris. I tried to wash it off with that alcohol. It worked. Now I'm going to use a fillet knife. You could use any knife to quickly rough this out. I know that I don't need that much added on, so I'm going to whittle away quite a bit of it first. The key to this is that you're in your shooting position, your eyes are closed, and you raise the rifle up, rest into it, and check fit. And then you're going to make a bunch of modifications. Check the fit again, modify, check the fit again, modify, check the fit again. You'll see I do this quite a bit. You can see finally I'm satisfied. It is late at night, so you can also see that in my face. A little bit of sandpaper smooths out the rough edges. That cartridge carrier dresses it up a little bit. A quick double check with that change. Now the worst thing you could actually ever do is use that cartridge carrier. You'll lose all your rounds, guaranteed. So I'm removing the temptation. I only wanted it to dress it up. Alright, now we're going to fine tune our modification. We need to take and move our scope from low power to its highest setting. Now this is going to narrow our field of view and create a scope shadow. That shadow's okay right now. It's going to let us know that our eye is centered in that scope. At least it is when you have concentric circles. I'm cutting padding here because I found out with that higher setting that my face had to get raised just a little bit more. It's easy to modify that with that elastic. Once the modification's added, check, check, and recheck. Took a while. Now that the butt height is set, we're going to set this scope for eye relief. In order to do that, we need to be on high power. And we need to be wearing clothes we'll typically wear in our normal shooting positions. All this will affect your eye relief. What we do is pull the scope up, see if we see a complete view or if there's some black around the edges, and then we move that scope back and forth until the scope is completely open and filled with an image. It's good to go. Now, because my rifle has a flat top on its action and a flat bottom on a scope, I can use a straight bar to put in between those two objects, rocking the scope left and right to make sure there's no play or space, ensuring that it's oriented and associated properly with the rifle and its bore. And you know, once I do that, I'm very careful when I set it down. Next is to torque down all the screws on the scope. It's best to do this in a crisscross pattern for each ring. There's one last adjustment, and that is to focus the crosshairs for clarity. I loosen the ocular ring, screwing it all the way forward. Now I'm going to adjust this housing for clarity. I'm going to close my eyes, raise the rifle, mount the rifle, open my eyes, and look at those crosshairs immediately before my eyes adjust. And then I'm going to screw that housing in or out to provide more focus. You'll have to fiddle for it around with this some, but eventually you'll get a very clear picture of your reticle. Once you're done, secure the locking ring. Test it one more time. Remember those ring screws? We never Loctited them. We're going to go back through, take out one at a time, and secure them and torque them down. We're going to go through both rings in a crisscross pattern. All right. Now that we've tightened up our screws and we've got them Loctited, or actually in this case nail polished in, that completes the setup. This rifle now fits my face because I've raised the comb. It fits my eye as far as eye relief. We've slid it back and forth. It fits my eye's focus because we moved that ocular housing, and it's as good as I'm going to get this. Matter of fact, the technique I showed you, even with this Allen key and some of the other equipment I used, is equipment that's been used for years that was good enough for the snipers in the Ranger Regiment where I served. And it's surely good enough for deer. All right, and the next time we meet, what we're going to do is get prepared to go to the range. We're going to talk about factory ammo choices and what we need to pick up. And then, more importantly, I'm going to talk about how to calculate your maximum point blank range. It's fairly easy. It's not nearly as involved as video number 9. We'll do that. We'll go to the range using our near zero. We'll bore sight this rifle to our near zero, and then we're going to zero it to our far zero and achieve our maximum point blank range. If you're new to the concept of maximum point blank range, I'll explain that with some graphics and diagrams in the next video. But until then, get outside and explore your nature.